Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'll be talking about the 2024 Senate elections, and I'll be doing another analysis of this map. It's been a couple months since I last did this, so I figured now would be a good time to start to look at this map. And a lot has changed since I last did it, so we're just going to get into it right here. I'm going to begin, as we always do, by filling out the states that are going to be safe for the Democrats. California was interesting because there was a chance Republicans would get locked out. But it's going to be Garvey versus Schiff. Garvey, the Republican, Schiff, the Democrat. Schiff will likely win by a good amount, as California is a very blue state. And then we're just going to go fill these out. Normally, Maryland's not. We'll talk about Maryland because something's changed there. We'll talk about New Jersey. But the rest of these states in New England should be pretty good for Democrats. We don't know if Bernie Sanders will run for re-election. I know both him and Angus King in Maine are technically independents, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to keep this at Democratic because they're independents, but they caucus and vote with Democrats. So that's really how it's going to work. And then there's a couple we need to talk about here. The first is Minnesota, which I'll put in the safe column. The latest poll had Amy Klobuchar, I think, up by 16% over a no-name Republican challenger. Republicans don't really have anyone to run against her, and she's won by 24% last time. I don't think she'll win by that much this time because 2018 was a blue wave, and it was a lot less polarized of an election than 2024 will be. But she will likely win by mid-teens. She'll outrun Biden by a very good amount, and she's not at risk of losing re-election whatsoever. Virginia, you could have a debate about putting it in safe or likely. Just for now, I'll put it in likely. Hung Cao is likely to be the GOP nominee. And we don't really know a lot about him. He ran for Congress in 2022 against Jennifer Wexton in a Biden plus 17 seat, and he only lost by 5. So he's a good candidate from what we do know. But I don't think he'll get any real funding or any level of support from the national GOP. Going over to New Mexico, this one I'm just going to put in likely because I think it could trend right a little bit in 2024, especially in the southern part of the state, which is mostly rural, non-college educated Hispanic voters. That's a demographic that I think most people would expect Biden to struggle with. So Democrats are going to win this state, but it could be a little closer than people think. And then going back to the Northeast, New Jersey, we're going to put in the likely column just for now. We don't know who the Democratic nominee will be. It could be Andy Kim, could be Tammy Murphy. Bob Menendez, I believe, is still or has yet to drop out or is still at least in the running. I don't think he'll be the nominee. It'll likely be one of Andy Kim or Tammy Murphy. If I had to guess, it's going to be Andy Kim, but it'll be a close primary. There's some conventions happening over the course of the past few weeks, and it's been pretty split, but Andy Kim does have momentum right now. We're putting that likely not because I think that, Kim or Tammy Murphy would lose to a Republican, but because if it's Menendez, it's a lot closer of a race. And then going over to Maryland, I don't really think is going to be that close. I'm going to put it in the likely column, but that's only because, we're being cautious here. And Maryland would normally be safe, and I think in the end it's not going to be that close. But in case you haven't heard, Larry Hogan is running for Senate, and he was the former governor of Maryland. He's a Republican. He won in 2014, then won in 2018. So he's won recently. He's not, some guy from the 2000s they're bringing out and no one remembers who he is. He's no Phil Bredesen. But he's certainly someone that I think is going to get some crossover appeal and is going to outrun Trump by a lot. Now, if this were a red wave midterm, I think Hogan would have more of a chance, but it's presidential year. Biden is going to win Maryland by I don't even know, probably 30 points, maybe something like that, maybe more. And Maryland is just such a blue state that it might just be too big of a ladder for Hogan to climb in a, Senate federal race. So, a lot of complexities on these blue states. Democrats are going to have a real tough time having to defend, Maryland when they usually be, having it written off from day one. But that's what candidate recruitment will do if you're a Republican. So now we're going to go over to our red states: Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, Nebraska. There's 2 Nebraskas because I think it's the Ben Sass seat is up for re-election because Ben Sass retired. Mississippi is going to be safe. Tennessee, Missouri with Josh Hawley is going to be safe. Even though, margin-wise, it could be a little, you can do it either way. You can put it likely. I guess just out of an abundance of caution, kind of like I'm doing for some of these blue states, I'll put Missouri in the likely. And that isn't to say that Hawley has any chance of losing. It's just to say, it'll be a little closer. Indiana's safe. West Virginia's safe. That's a pickup. Joe Manchin's not running for re-election, so Democrats aren't even going to bother spending time there. And then Florida isn't it's definitely not safe, but we're just going to put it likely because I don't really have much to say about it. Debbie Merkersol-Powell is running for the Democrats, and she's not a bad candidate, but she also isn't, I think, someone who's capable of beating Rick Scott. Scott won the blue wave year in 2018 against an incumbent Democrat, and, that isn't to say that I think Scott's this amazing candidate. He's probably weaker than Marco Rubio, so he's like the weaker of the two senators, but, he's won tough races before, and he's the incumbent in a state that's increasingly Republican. I would be shocked if he was, came close to losing. He'll probably win by, 6-7 points. So it's less close than these other states have filled out, but I did want to kind of get it out of the way here. And so what you'll notice is that Republicans are at 49 seats, and they're only, if you think Trump's going to win, they're only 1 seat away from a majority. And if you think Biden's going to win, they're only 2 seats. And they can do that, running through their own territory. They can do it in Montana, Texas, or Ohio, all of which are states that voted for Trump in 2020. And if they just win all these, no matter what, they get the majority. In fact, they can even lose Texas, say, and they can still get the majority. So Republicans have a pretty easy path to the Senate here, and that's why, as you'll see, there's a lot more pressure on them to win the chamber this year. So now we're going to start. We're just going to go into our, more, close to lean, but some, still likely Democratic states. These are Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, it's likely going to be McCormick versus Casey, and that's not a bad matchup for the GOP. Casey's a very popular incumbent Democrat, and I would be shocked if he loses. So I'm not, implying that I think Pennsylvania has really any real chance of flipping, but I would say that, David McCormick, who is, I think, a wealthy business, or I think he's a hedge fund guy, or something in, business terms that I'm, not well versed enough in to talk about. But he's from Connecticut. He's a wealthy dude, and he's, going to run a more moderate, kind of conservative campaign. And the advantage to that is that he's going to self-fund. And the Republicans are just going to say, all right, you get to run for this seat. Have fun spending millions upon millions of your own dollars on this race. And that's, what's going to happen. And that's going to, force Democrats to spend money to match them because they're not just going to, surrender the airwaves. But it'll be productive for the GOP because they're probably not going to win, but they will, kind of create a money sink in a state where Democrats would have otherwise been fine just leaving it to Casey alone to win, like what happened in 2018. Regardless, that state will probably stay blue. Wisconsin is next up. Wisconsin is a little closer than Pennsylvania. There's a lot of hype about Hovde, who is the Republican nominee, or Republican likely nominee. He's just a candidate for now. And, he will probably do okay, but, Tammy Baldwin is a really good incumbent, won by 11% in 2018. She'll win by less this time because it's not a blue wave, and it's not, in 2018, the GOP didn't really fund her opponent, Leah Vukmir, and this time they'll probably give Hovde some amount of help. But nevertheless, the seat isn't important to the Republicans. They have a much easier path through their own states, and Baldwin's a really popular incumbent. I'd be pretty surprised if he loses. So we're now going to get into our leading Republican states, and I think here's where it's going to get difficult for Democrats, because I'm going to give Republicans the majority with Texas and Montana. So starting out with Texas, Colin Allred is a good candidate for Democrats, but they have a lot of really, things to be concerned about in Texas in 2024. The first is that on top of just not doing that well in 2022, it wasn't a disaster, for Democrats in 2022, but they didn't do anything, really impressive either. And Texas stayed pretty red. And then in in the primary, we saw that Democrats didn't really do all that well, in terms of turnout. And Biden especially struggled in a lot of the majority Hispanic counties in the South. And we saw that, Colin Allred, who won the primary decisively, didn't really do that well in those counties either. So, the Rio Grande Valley is one of the most discussed regions of American politics just in general, because it's so right-trending so rapidly. But it doesn't, on one hand, that's true, and it's gonna restrict Democratic, movement in Texas for a little bit. It's also not that big. It's, a lot smaller than, the Dallas metro or Houston or San Antonio or even Austin or, so I would say that this is all to say that Colin Allred, if he wins, he'll do it through Austin and Dallas, but Austin and Dallas still have a couple of years to go if you're a Democrat. So the trends just aren't there. The math just isn't there. I understand that Ted Cruz didn't do that well in 2018. He came pretty close to losing, but that was in a much more Democratic electorate than we're going to see in 2024, especially with Trump juicing turnout for Republicans, especially in rural Texas. So now we're going to go over to Montana. And this one is, I'd say, a little more interesting than Texas, because Texas, we're kind of stuck between a set of outcomes where, at best for Democrats, Cruz will win by 2. At worst, he'll win by 5 or 6. Whereas Montana, Tester still has a path, but he could also lose by 10. And so I would say Tester's path is just, really hoping that there's still, and a lot of it is just luck for Democrats. But if Tester does win, it'll be because Montana's a small state. It's weird. It does weird things. It's kind of like Maine. I think someone raised, last year, someone was talking to me and they raised the example of, well, in Maine, Susan Collins won because it's Maine's a small state and there's kind of a local field of politics that isn't the same in, a bigger swing state. And Montana's kind of similar. Tester is, a well-liked, senator. He has led in every poll. It's early, but he has led in every poll. And, there is an element of locality in Montana politics that you don't see in a lot of other states. And Montana is known to do this kind of thing where they elect Democrats locally, but will be very solid for Republicans at the presidential level. So Montana, I would say, chance Tester wins, wouldn't bank on it. And he's going to have to do it in a presidential year. And, there are people who like Tester who aren't going to vote for him. And that's just the way it's going to go. And I think that's where Democrats are going to lose Montana. We also have to remember that I did just say Tester's leading in every poll that's been released up to this point. That's true. But his leads, he's in the mid-40s. He's the latest poll, he's up 44% to 42%. And that's not great if you're an incumbent senator and everyone knows who you are and you're only at 44%. So, yeah, leading in polls, good. Being at 44%, not good. Tester, I think, loses. So now we're going to get into our lean Democratic states here. And I'm only going to give there's a good amount here. Starting with Michigan. I think it's likely Eliza Slotkin's going to be the nominee. She's not, the greatest candidate ever for Democrats. There's been some concerns about her, but she will win the primary, and I think she'll win the general. I don't have a lot to say about this race. I just think that it's going to be, a 2 to 4 point margin for Democrats. And the Republicans, I think, are probably going to invest in this race because it is an open seat, but I also don't think that I think that they know that Michigan is going to be one of those states where they'd like to have it. They would they also at the same time know they don't need to have it. And again, they can win the Senate through Montana, Texas, and Ohio, or even just Montana and Texas, as I just showed you. And they're not going to need Michigan. So Democrats are probably going to win it, but it'll be close. Nevada, I think, is, it's bordering on tilt, but I'll put it in lean for now. Actually, we'll be cautious. Put it in tilt at this point, just because we're a little far from the election still. And this is one I don't have much to say about either. Jackie Rosen likely to run against. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. I know what he looks like. He's a veteran. He's the GOP candidate. He ran against Adam Laxalt in 2022, and he's likely to be the GOP nominee. This time, Sam Brown is what his name is. I can't believe I forgot that for a few seconds. Sam Brown is the likely GOP nominee here. I think he's a fine candidate. Don't know too much about him. I think that he has not said anything that I think a lot of Republicans have fallen down the trap of just saying extreme things that cost them with voters. Sam Brown hasn't done that yet. But Jackie Rosen's a good incumbent. She won by 6% in 2018. She'll win by less this time, but I think she will win. Just because Nevada does like to elect Democrats, by narrow margins, kind of their thing, especially locally. The Senate races have been pretty good for Democrats. In 2022, Cortez Masto won in a GOP electorate. I think as long as there's not a massive red wave, Rosen will be favored to win. So that's Nevada. Arizona, I'm pretty confident Democrats are going to win now that Kyrsten Sinema has dropped out. I was always a believer that she was going to cost Democrats this race if they did lose it, or at least hurt them and make the margin thinner. But now it's just a 1v1. It's Ruben Gallego versus Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake lost the governor's race for the GOP last midterm in 2022. She's an extreme candidate. She still hasn't, accepted that she lost that race. She's, still is, spreading just false ideas that the election was somehow stolen from her. We know that isn't true. And that's going to hurt her because the majority of voters don't like that. And Carrie Lake is the easiest possible boogeyman for Democrats in this state. It's easy to make her sound extreme based on her positions on abortion and on the election, excuse me. Whereas, Ruben Gallego, He's from Phoenix. I think, will do better than Biden, especially with Hispanic voters. He is Hispanic himself. He has done better historically with Hispanic voters in the city of Phoenix within his district than other candidates like Joe Biden, especially in 2020. And I would expect that with Trump and Lake being the GOP ticket in Arizona, there's going to be some problems for them in the suburbs. And that's enough to make me think they lose. Arizona's a bluer state now. Mark Kelly won by 5 in 2022. Gallego might not win by 5, but I think he'll win by a lot more than Joe Biden, because Joe Biden might lose Arizona. I think it's a toss-up. I think Gallego's pretty clearly favored to beat Kerry Lake. So that leaves Ohio. Ohio is, I think, the closest right now, but I'm going to give it to the GOP. Sherrod Brown, good incumbent, but I would argue that it might not be good enough. He's in a bit better of a spot than John Tester because his state is a lot less Republican. Ohio voted for Trump by 8. Montana voted for Trump by 16. So he is in a state that's 8% bluer. He also, I would say, has won just more decisively than Tester. In 2018, he won by 7. Tester won by 3. And he was at and it was and Tester's won 3 times, the same as Sherrod Brown. They both have won 06, 12, and 18. But in 06, 12, and 18, Brown won decisively, whereas in 06 and 12, Tester won with less than 50% of the vote, and then in 2018, he won with 50.7% or something like that. So Brown's in a blue state, bit stronger of an incumbent, I would say, or maybe not stronger of an incumbent, but just a bit stronger because he's in a blue state and he's won by more historically. And the GOP seem like they might run Bernie Moreno, who is a rather extreme GOP candidate. I would say he's not like Kerry Lake, but he is certainly not the best choice for them. I think he's going to do pretty poorly in the suburbs. I think Sherrod Brown's going to hold on to some of his crossover support from working class voters, but for now, I'm going to say that he will lose. So that's the map: 52 GOP, 48 Democrats. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any ratings you disagree with, and I'll be posting these more often. So hopefully, I'll be able to, do one next month. And again, subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you all in the next one.